Oh hey Procurement World, I'm Charles Dominick from the Next Level Purchasing Association, and today we are going to be talking about one important aspect of procurement talent management. That aspect is procurement recruiting. Recently, there has been a shift in how organizations are recruiting their procurement talent. Today, there are two seemingly opposite approaches to the way that organizations look to fill their open procurement positions. First, there is a traditional approach, and there is a radical approach. Radical! Let's explore. First, the traditional approach. Now, for years, procurement leaders would attempt to fill any open procurement position they had with candidates whose backgrounds closely matched the descriptions of the jobs that they were hiring for. The perfect candidate was someone who had experience in the industry, procurement experience, and even experience managing the same categories of goods and services that they would be managing for the new company. Now, obviously, there are many advantages to the traditional approach of recruiting procurement talent. These include industry loyalty.
Screws, screws. I love good quality screws.
If you hire someone who is loyal to your industry, that means in order to retain that person, you don't have to be the most attractive employer in the entire world. You just have to be the most attractive employer in that industry. Less risk of mistake.
I's dotted, T's crossed.
Modern procurement has a lot of complexity to it. There's a lot of nuances involved in it in terms of doing it right. So if you hire someone who has been there and done that, chances are over the years they've learned how to avoid those procurement-driven disasters that can happen. And shorter time to independence.
And independent by noon.
You know, let's face it, some categories are relatively easy to buy and manage. Others not so much. You may need to know some fine details in order to get technical acceptability or to meet quality requirements or to establish the right type of supplier synergies for competitive advantage. So if you have someone that can basically lift and shift those processes, those skill sets, etc., right to your organization, that means the time between the time you hire them and the time when they deliver value independently will be much shorter than if you hired an inexperienced candidate. Now, despite all of the advantages of the traditional approach to recruiting procurement talent, it's not without its disadvantages too. These include lack of breakthrough ideas.
Can't we just do what we did in 1998?
If you're hiring someone to manage the same category they've already managed, chances are you're going to learn about what they're going to do for you in the interview, and they may not have any new ideas that they can adapt to your world over time. And especially if they're replacing a pretty successful predecessor, you may not see a dramatic positive transformation in that category that they're managing. Potential cultural conflict.
You want to discuss this over foosball?
If you're hiring someone who is staying in the same industry, staying in procurement, and even managing the same categories they've always managed, chances are that the person may be someone that seeks continuity. Said a different way, they may be someone that's averse to change. And even though different companies can have very similar, maybe even identical job descriptions, the corporate cultures can be very, very different. So if you have someone that is averse to change and put them in a culture that is probably different than they expect, there could be big problems, so you got to be careful. All right, now let's talk about the radical approach to recruiting procurement talent. Radical! Now, even though the traditional approach was successful for many, and logical in many cases, it is not without its disadvantages, as we just saw. So those disadvantages have opened the door for a new approach to come in. And in the radical approach to recruiting procurement talent, there are three characteristics of the perfect candidate. They are a personality that fits the corporate culture.
Like button.
Influential charisma.
Ooh, I'll heart that one.
And intellectual potential.
Thumbs up.
Now, what makes this approach radical
Radical!
is that hiring managers don't care so much if a candidate has never worked in the industry or has never managed the categories for which they are being hired to manage or has any procurement experience at all. You know, they generally feel that procurement isn't rocket science, except in companies that build rockets, in which case procurement may be rocket science, but for most companies, procurement is not rocket science, and it's something that can be taught to someone who has some intellectual horsepower.
IQ 166.
Whereas, you know, a personality that fits the corporate culture is something that a candidate either has or doesn't have. It is not something that can be taught. You know, procurement has evolved from an order placing function to a function that creates these valuable synergies between internal customers and strategic suppliers. So, human relation skills are more important in procurement than ever. And the radical approach to procurement recruiting speaks to just those things. So it has some advantages. Those advantages include support for procurement's increased involvement.
I will listen to you, and together we will solve your problems.
Let's face it, all of the technical knowledge in the world won't help procurement maximize its value if internal customers and management don't like or trust members of the procurement team. If you have procurement representatives that inspire internal stakeholders, then you will get the cooperation necessary to fully leverage all of the technical procurement skills that you bring to the table. Another advantage is bandwidth to learn.
IQ 166.
You know, having a full range of procurement skills is a moving target. You know, what is a complete portfolio of procurement skills today will be an incomplete portfolio for tomorrow. So if you have that intellectual potential on your team that I talked about, then you will have people who are capable of learning the most modern procurement practices, and they will be able to adapt and learn as procurement changes going into postmodern procurement. Now, just as the traditional approach to recruiting procurement talent had its disadvantages, so does the radical approach. These disadvantages include high risk of mistake.
I can talk, text, and drink this latte at the same time.
You know, let's face it, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in procurement. You know, procurement's like a jungle with pitfalls, landmines, or whatever other metaphor you want to use. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong if you're not prepared, if you're not thinking like a procurement person thinks, or if you haven't been trained in the procurement best practices, things like that. So if you hire someone, quote unquote, off the street, there's a high risk that something is going to go wrong. They're going to learn the hard way. And, you know, can your business afford that? Maybe, maybe not. Another disadvantage is that the person may not even like procurement.
When I grow up, I want to be a rock star.
You know, and despite all of the advances that procurement has made over the last 5, 10, 20 years, it's still maybe not the sexiest profession out there. So, you know, you may hire someone that over a short period of time or even a medium range period of time decides that procurement just isn't their bag, baby. And then you may have to start recruiting all over again. So that is a risk that you take. You know, if you want someone that has the passion for procurement, that wants to see a procurement transformation through, the radical approach may leave you a little bit short. Now, even though the radical approach to recruiting procurement talent is currently hot,
radical!
I say step back for a second. Ask the question, is it possible for you to find a candidate who is both a seasoned procurement professional?
Yep.
And someone that has a personality that fits your corporate culture?
Yep.
Absolutely. So this dichotomy that has arisen over the last couple of years and gotten so much attention, I think it's really kind of unnecessary. Perhaps in some cases you won't be able to find a candidate who has the perfect procurement track record.
I negotiated a $1 million discount.
and the type of personality that will enable them to be adored by your company's stakeholders.
Thank you! Thank you! Thank you!
But shouldn't that at least be the target? I say shoot for the stars. Boom, 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 boom. And if you can't find someone that has all of the characteristics of both approaches, choose the candidate that has the best combination of characteristics from both of those approaches. Just keep in mind which gaps can be filled through procurement training and which gaps can't. Well, that wraps things up for today on our discussion of procurement recruiting. If you'd like to learn more about the other aspects of procurement talent management, I invite you to download the Next Level Purchasing Association's latest white paper called Procurement Talent Management, Recruiting, Training, and Retaining a Modern and Awesome Buying Team. You can find that white paper at www.nextlevelpurchasing.com/talent. So, this is Charles Dominick from the Next Level Purchasing Association saying, I hope to see you next time, Procurement World.